So, what would you do to help small delegations promote their delegates to run for high elected positions?
So something in this program that I've been a firm believer in is small delegations. I come from a middle-sized delegation, and being elected into statewide is so hard. You know, you see people from your delegation getting appointed into leadership, but they can never get elected because of the size of your delegation, and that's wrong. And I'm tired of hearing elected officials and people running for positions promising things that they can't accomplish. You can't promise something that's infeasible. So what I want to do is make sure that I have a network, a communication network with all small delegation presidents to ensure that we're relaying information to them, to make sure that their delegates are getting into the program areas that they want to be in, that they can make the most change in the program in. And I want to see coalitions form between these small delegations so that they can support each other's candidates, because it's important to see that we're promoting diversity, and diversity includes all size delegations. Thank you.
So kind of through the campaign process, I called a lot of very small delegations. I called delegations of around 20 kids. I called a delegation of 7 kids. And talking to them, I realized that it's such an issue for them to be able to run candidates for elected positions. And for that reason, I want to change the voting system of youth in government, either some sort of transferable voting system or a double vote system, which would force delegates from larger delegations to vote outside of just their candidate. So essentially, they could give one vote to their candidate and then choose another candidate based not on the delegation they come from, but based on what they actually believe in.
So something that I obviously have is that I come from a big delegation. And so I know that I will readily acknowledge that I will never be able to fully understand exactly what it's like to be in a small delegation. But throughout this whole campaign process, I have been able to talk to a lot of small delegations and really understand, their problems. And I think that one thing that they have been expressing concern with is a lack of representation. So this is one thing that I have talked about. I would make sure that if I were elected youth governor, that I have a permanent representative from a small delegation on my cabinet so that I can listen to what they believe in, because I really want to let them, have a say in what is going on in youth and government. Another thing that I believe in is the expansion of issues and activism. Issues and activism has a campaigns vertical, and they have a really large platform for being able to promote candidates. And I think that that is a really good way to give delegates from a small delegation a group of people that can help them in statewide elections.
Did you support the hashtag Why We Wear Black movement? Why or why not?
Of course I do. I think that this is such a huge issue. Obviously, we have seen the Me Too movement just blow up on social media, at the Golden Globes, and other places around the world. And I think that that is something that needs to be talked about, because it hasn't been talked about for a very long time.
I'm a firm supporter of the Me Too movement and the Why We Wear Black movement. For me personally, I see youth in government as, unfortunately, not a safe haven from the issues of sexual assault and the issues of silence in youth in government. Just recently, we had a delegate be kicked out for sexual assault, and I think that's something that we need to change the narrative of youth in government. This is a safe space where we're sharing our political beliefs, but yet we still continue to face the same crimes. And for this reason, I want to really expand FLIP and make sure that's a place where delegates who aren't comfortable going to their advisors can go to the FLIP representatives, talk to them, and have their situations be handled anonymously.
So this brings me back to, we had the open mic night for caucuses last night, and we talked about the Why We Wear Black movement. And I readily support this movement, but someone brought up the fact that although we support this movement, we aren't educating people on the issues that are really faced around this. And people are wearing black, but they don't understand what people are actually going through. And I think that as a program, we need to make sure that we're educating people. We need to support those who are affected by this, but we need to educate the public about what's actually happening, what people are going through. And I think that that's something that we need to work towards in the future.
Do you feel the parties are diverse enough to fit different delegates?
I'm someone who promotes diversity amongst all masses. And I believe that in youth and government, we have several delegates who feel excluded because of their political beliefs. We have delegates who feel excluded because of their genders and their sexualities. We have delegates who believe that their color is affecting the way that they're judged in the program, and that's unacceptable. As parties, we need to make sure that we're promoting diversity. And this means that we're promoting plank ideas that might not have everything to do with what our party believes in and what the majority, but we need to make sure that we're supporting those delegates who feel that they don't have a voice, because that's important. We're in a program where we're here to make change. We're not here to argue with each other. We're not here to disagree with each other. We're here to make change, and we're here to figure out ideas on how we can make a progression in California and how we can make the state of California a better place for everybody.
As much as I appreciate the political party system this year, it clearly has its flaws. And I think one of the biggest things is political ostracization that we've been seeing within the political parties because they aren't divided by political ideology. And so instead of a political party coming together to support common planks, we're having debates over planks where we have people from opposite ends of the spectrum believing different things having to do with our planks. And I don't think anyone within a specific party should disagree with their party's beliefs. Obviously, there's room for debate, but you should be in a party in which you believe in and in which you can support. And I feel like the political party system we have currently does not follow that. And for that reason, I want to divide political parties by political ideology in an effort to give delegates some sort of community behind them when they're going up to speak during session.
So I obviously agree with the previous speaker, and I believe that one way that we can solve this problem is by making sure that people are more educated when they're taking the political compass survey. This was something that a lot of delegates didn't really necessarily understand. They didn't know that they were actually going to be put in a party because of it, because there was a lack of communication. Obviously, this year was the first year, and so there's going to be some kinks that we need to work out. But I think that next year we really need to promote the idea of allowing delegates to transfer parties, to apply, to be able to go to a different party if they believe that their political ideology fits with that one better. And also we need to make sure that delegates are better understanding of what exactly the political compass survey is and how we can actually divide up the parties effectively.
Okay, now on to a much lighter note. This year, we've seen meme pages that are popular throughout YNG that support candidates. How do you feel about them, and do you think they have a place in elections?
Do I think they have a place in the elections? I mean, I don't think anyone can tell them that they don't. I think that the meme pages are an important part of YNG just because it's a social commentary on what goes on here. And I think that it's important that we allow them to speak their mind. I don't think anyone can tell them to stop. And I think that they, bring a little bit of fun and joy to the program.
I'm a pretty avid follower of the YNG meme pages. They're so funny, honestly. They're just so relatable too. And I've seen them, I think they really have had some influence over kind of the elections, which is something that's really interesting. But yeah, it's something I think we should continue to expand and continue to support because, who doesn't love a meme? Yeah.
I see, I'm in class and I'm scrolling through meme pages and I see funny things and I love it. I honestly think that meme pages are so amazing and everyone's entitled to their own opinions, whether they support myself, Emily, or Nick. I think that it's important that they're voicing their opinions because they're influential delegates in this program and they deserve as much as a say as anybody else, as much as the parties, as much as the delegates, as much as delegations. They're a part of this program and I think they've made their mark and we all know the meme pages. We all follow the meme pages. So they deserve a voice and they deserve a chance to say what they believe.
How do you feel about the amount of security that was provided in Fresno and the lack of it here in Sacramento?
I think that in Fresno, it was important for us to have that much security, especially because there was a new company that came in and they weren't really familiar with the youth in government program as a whole. And I think that it was a safe way that they were able to implement this and make sure that they were keeping our delegates safe. But I think in Sacramento, we have established a place in this program where we have tried time and time again, proven ourselves to be respectful and approachable and not dangerous to the public. And I think that that's why they have lightened up on security. And I think that that's a great thing that as a program, we are promoting safety and we are promoting following code of conduct. And I think that that's amazing. And that's what's great about this program.
I understand that security can kind of be annoying sometimes. You're trying to get to session and maybe you're late and you have to wait in line. But it's such an important thing in youth and government. I don't think we can have discussion and political debates if there's a fear of safety, especially because we are all minors for the most part. So making sure that we're promoting safety in youth and government, taking whatever means necessary.
So obviously, I think that safety is the #1 priority in youth and government. However, at Fresno, I believe that there was a severe lack in the safety. If you guys didn't notice, half the times their metal detector batons weren't even on. It was something that was, difficult for them to implement because there were so many delegates. And I think that they should either have a really effective security or not at all, because otherwise they're just creating long lines. And so I think that we need to make sure that we are promoting safety, that we are making sure that our delegates are not, in any kind of danger, but we need to also make sure that it is effective and that it's not just some kind of fear tactic that they use to try to weed out people that maybe shouldn't be here.
What is one political ideology that you carry that is different from the other candidates?
Well, I believe that I am a little bit more fiscally responsible. I've always been someone that's been an advocate for private businesses and someone that's been, really involved in the idea of having competition between small businesses and making sure that we have an effective economy. That's something that I've talked about for a very long time, and maybe that's slightly different from the other candidates. I'm not exactly sure what their economic policies are.
So actually, I would agree with Nick on that. I'm a little bit more fiscally conservative, I would say, a little bit more middle of the line. And for me personally, I don't choose to be either liberal or conservative. I choose to kind of be an independent in the sense that I don't think I can fill in the boxes for every single issue by claiming a political party ideology. And for that reason, I say that kind of where I might fall conservative on some issues or I might fall more liberal on other issues. And I think that's where we get most of our disagreements is when it comes to very specific issues.
Well, I just found out what I differ from the other two candidates. I am more fiscally liberal. I come from a lower middle class family myself, and I've worked the fields on my grandfather's farm, and I've met people who have so much issues and they can't pay for the things that they can't tax themselves. I go to homeless shelters and I see these people who have mental illnesses, but they can't afford health care, they can't afford help, they can't afford housing. And that's why I really think that as a community, we need to make sure that we're helping to help the little guy out. We need to band together and make sure that we're making a happier and safer place for everybody.
Okay, now the following questions will be addressed specifically to a candidate, and then it'll just be you that will respond to these questions. Okay, so Scott, we're going to start with you. Of course. Scott, your party stated that they would like to increase the per pupil funding in public schools. Where would the money come from?
So something that's commonly misunderstood with this plank idea is that we're not increasing the amount of money that is going towards public schools. We're reallocating the funds already given to public schools to more directly go towards the students. Currently in our state budget, 42% of the funding goes towards public education. That's a lot of money. And what we constantly see is we're still $2,000 under the national average for per pupil funding in America. The national average is $11,000, and we are currently at a measly $9,000 in line with states like Mississippi and Alabama. And we're ranked 42 in the country for public education, and we constantly see a trend that the states like New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania that are spending more on their students, having $13,000 given annually to their students, are ranked top 5 in the nation. And California needs to improve this, and I would like to see a reallocation of funds to make sure that we're increasing our per pupil funding to at least $11,000 so that we can raise and make sure that our students aren't getting C- averages in schools.
Okay. Emily, what is your preferred method on prisoner rehabilitation, and why do you think it's the most effective?
Yeah, great question. So prisoner rehabilitation is something I'm very passionate about. So often we see prisoners coming out of the prison system and then immediately falling back into it. And it's this constant cycle that we see with prisoners. And I think one of the best ways we can go about that is once you get released from prison, you have to be put into some sort of system to get you back into the real world, to get you with a working job, to get you with a home. And so we don't just abandon the citizens that we are putting in prisons and then essentially forgetting about.
Nick, seeing as how there are 3 parties that endorse you, the Redwood Party, the Avocado Party, and the Grizzly Party, how do you manage to incorporate all their platforms in your campaign?
Yes, so as a candidate, I have personally endorsed several planks from each party. I obviously support generally all of them. Of course, it's difficult to balance that much of a diversity of ideas, but ultimately, it's something that I'm open to. I am not going to constrain myself by my own personal beliefs. I want to make sure that the delegates' beliefs are heard. So that's something that is not necessarily fitting in line with me. I believe that generally we should be incorporating delegates' ideas into the program, not necessarily just boxing it into what I believe.
Okay, so can you pass the microphone to Scott, please? Another part of your platform is the support of women's reproductive rights. Can you go into detail on the meaning of your platform and your stance on it?
So I was raised as a Catholic, and I was always told that life is happening from conception, and that was tried to ingrain into my mind. But as I grew older, I began to realize that I can make my own decisions on how I feel about these issues, and I realize that women undergo so much more than I could ever imagine and so much more than I could ever comprehend. And it's no lawmaker, no primarily a white middle-aged man to tell a woman whether or not she can have a safe abortion in our systems. And so that's something that I really support, and I think that what we're promoting is ensuring that women have rights and women have the right to their own bodies and they know what to do with it and they're responsible, and I know that they'll make the right decisions for who they are, and it's no lawmakers, it's no other person's job or place to tell them what otherwise.
Okay. I was supposed to say this in the beginning of the debate, and I totally forgot. So if you are out in the audience and you are from the Redwood, Trout, or Gold Party, in a couple minutes we're going to have a question from the audience to act for the candidates. So if you want to just sit there and come up with a question, and we'll get back to you in a little bit. All right, thank you. Now the next couple of questions are going to be non-YNG related, so we just want to hear what you have to say about these. According to earthjustice.org, fracking in California is legal in 10 counties. Do you agree with fracking? If not, how would you replace it and why?
So a large part of my own platform is to have a tax on large corporations to ensure that they aren't fracking and they aren't taking advantage of our natural resources. So I'm highly against fracking, and I don't believe that that's something that we should be doing, especially in California where we have one of the highest rates of national parks, and we need to preserve our ecosystems, and fracking is not a way that we're going to do that. That just helps large corporations, and I'm firmly against fracking. Thank you.
Oil is one of those resources that we simply have to get. If you drive a car, you know it for a fact. Especially petroleum, which is the largest natural resource that we are using, is something that large companies have a monopoly on and are exploiting at enormous rates. And for this reason, we need to be providing much more serious legislation against oil companies who are continuing to frack. Because it is so destructive to our environment, and it is something that they have a monopoly on, and for that reason, we have to make sure that we are going about fracking as a serious issue and one that we can't just incentivize, but one that we have to put serious legislation against.
So I am strongly against fracking because I believe that as a society we are too dependent on fossil fuels. I think that we need to be moving away from fossil fuels and more towards sustainable energy. This is something that I've talked about for a very long time because ultimately in California we are having a system where the majority of our energy is coming from coal and natural gas. This is something that is a problem, obviously, because of CO2 emissions and air pollution. And so I believe that we need to be decreasing our dependency on fossil fuels and moving towards more sustainable and efficient energy sources like hydroelectric power and fusion energy.
Okay. If you were placed in the governor's office of California right now, not youth in government, what would be the first issue you would tackle?
Probably immigration because it's under a lot of attack right now. I think that the DACA program needs to be strongly supported because of the issues that it's facing with the current administration. And so that would be the most pressing issue of my administration.
For me personally, I see sex education as being one that California is critically falling behind in, and it's something that we can't afford to continue to wait on. We have to be making sure that we are providing comprehensive and medically accurate sex education because we have the legislation in place, and the legislation is passed. It's just simply not being enforced, specifically in low-income schools and low-income districts where we're seeing high instances of teen pregnancy and high instances of STD transmission.
I'm with you on this one, Nick. I think that we need to tackle immigration head on. I have been preaching about immigration as long as I can have been in this program, and it's something that I'm a firm believer coming from an immigrant family myself, seeing and interacting with immigrants. I think that it's really important that we need to realize that it's hard for them to come to this country legally. We have the highest immigrant population. Almost over 1/4 of California's state population is foreign-born, and over 1/4 of those immigrants are undocumented, and that's unacceptable. We need to make sure that we're finding pathways to citizenships for these people because they're tax-paying Americans, and they still don't have amnesty. They still can't get jobs. They still can't get an education, and that's unacceptable. We need to find pathways to citizenship. We need to focus attention away from how much education they have in their home country, how much money they make in their home country. We need to run faster background checks and make it easier process for them.
Okay, now can I get a question from the audience? Someone from the Redwood Party, please. You, sir. Oh, okay, and a Trout person? Yes. Do we just say it? just come here. Yeah, I'm talking about.
Do you know about the National School Walkout in protest of gun violence? And if so, what is your opinion on it? And where do you sort of stand on gun violence in general?
I think that with gun violence, we need to make sure that we're educating people about the dangers of gun. And I strongly support any movement that people feel will help to make them feel safer in schools and make their fellow classmates feel safer in schools. And if that means a walkout, then I support them in their cause. But I believe that with gun violence, there can be restrictions. But more importantly, we need to make sure that we're focusing on education and helping the mentally ill so that we can have programs, because we constantly find these shooters having some mental disabilities, or sometimes they're in depression and they don't have a space for help, and where they're not educated on the violence of guns. And I think that that's something that we really need to focus on, because it might not be super feasible to ban all guns as some of us would like in an ideal world, but you know, we can educate people and we can take those steps to make sure that gun violence is lowered in this country, because I'm tired of seeing people scared in the public schools. It's supposed to be a safe place of education. It shouldn't be a place where you're fearing for your life.
So I haven't heard about that specific walkout in particular, but gun violence is something I'm very passionate about. At my school, we had someone with a gun come onto our campus, and the procedure that was held was completely faulty. We actually didn't even know we were on lockdown, and we didn't know that there was someone on our campus with a gun. And that's a terrifying situation to be in. To be completely helpless in that situation is something no student should ever have to go through, especially when a school is supposed to be a safe space. And for that reason, I think we need better background checks on guns. We need to make sure that the guns we are giving people are going into the hands of law-abiding citizens and not school shooters, not people who are mentally disabled and specifically people who, gun violence is something that specifically pertains to suicide, and that's a really scary thing to talk about. But essentially, we have to make sure that we're not giving guns to people who are going to be using them to hurt themselves or hurt other people.
So I also have not specifically heard about that specific walkout, but I do support any kind of movement in favor of it, because I believe that gun violence is something that is a huge problem in California and in the country. I agree that we need to be having stricter background checks, but I also think that we need to be implementing more psychiatric tests of people who own guns, because ultimately it is an incredible responsibility to own a gun. You have a tool that it can be used to take the life of another human being. And that is something that is extremely important to learn, that you cannot allow anyone with any kind of mental illness or criminal history allowed to have a gun. And you also need to train them how to use a gun safely, because just because you don't have a mental illness doesn't mean you're not responsible. So I think that that's something that is incredibly important. I also believe that we need to be changing the culture in America, because right now we are too focused on perpetrators after school shootings. We need to be talking about victims. We need to be talking about their families and making sure that we're supporting them in the processes.
Okay, now can I have the delegate from the Redwood Party?
What do you think is most important in supporting our veterans returning home from deployment?
So right now in America, we have a huge issue with our veterans. 22 veterans kill themselves every single day. 1 in 5 of veterans will be finding themselves with a serious mental illness. And I'm not talking about minor depression. I'm talking about PTSD, chronic brain traumatic brain injury, and making sure that we need to make sure that we are having our veterans looked after by our VA. Right now, the secretary of the VA has actually had a couple of scandals where he's been improperly allocating money. He hasn't actually been going to the VA hospitals and seeing the situation firsthand. And because of that, it has led to irresponsible leadership of the Veterans Administration. And we need to make sure that the VA is accountable for their actions, because if we don't, they're just going to keep giving our men and women in uniform crappy service and allowing them to commit suicide in the masses. So this is something that is a huge issue.
Similar to what Nick said, we need to really be restructuring and reallocating the funds of the VA. It's a system that is completely failing, and that's evidence of the number of homeless people who are veterans. The people who are serving our country should not be coming back from warfare only to be met with no help from our governments. They are really the ones protecting our nation on an international scale, and as a society, we are completely forgetting about them.
Medical care, vaccines, and prescription drugs. I think that those are three things that we need to make sure that every veteran has access to. They serve our country, they fight for our lives, they fight giving up their own lives, and I think that it's important that we're supporting them in their health and making sure that they have access to these necessities.
Can we now have a delegate from the Gold Party with a question who'd like to come up?
An issue that Trump failed to mention in his State of the Union address.
Something that I was very disappointed that I didn't hear that Trump mentioned in the State of the Union address was the very large-scale Me Too movement that was happening. He didn't address any of these movements that support social justice, and that's something that I'm a firm believer in. And I believe that it's the president's job as one of our leaders to make sure that he's supporting his constituents on their movements of change. And the fact that he didn't even address this, he didn't address a lot of things like his investigation with Russia that was happening. He didn't talk a lot about gun violence in the United States after so many shootings, and I think that these were all missed opportunities that he really needed to speak out about, and he failed to, and that's disappointing that we have leaders in power who aren't speaking about these movements and these different issues.
So obviously healthcare has been a really big concern with the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. And I think that was something he failed to really address in his State of the Union address. With that being such a contentious issue, with that being such a pressing issue for families all across America who have suddenly lost their healthcare, and for all the women in America who have suddenly become in fear of the fact that they may be losing their reproductive rights, specifically with the defunding of Planned Parenthood. I think that's something that is on the minds of so many Americans. It's a life-threatening issue, and that's something he failed to mention.
I think that the biggest thing that Trump failed to mention was talking about the environment. The environment is such a huge issue. It affects every single person in the entire world, and he didn't talk about it at all. I think that we need to be making sure that we're going towards sustainable energy, and we need to be making sure that we're decreasing our dependency on fossil fuels. I wish Trump would say that. I wish Trump would talk about the issues that we're having instead of blindly supporting coal mining. I think that this is something that we need to be talking about as a country and making sure that our administration is accountable for it with his actions and his policies.
Okay, that is all the questions we have today. Can we give our candidates a warm round of applause? Thank you all so much for coming out. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone.